way, right, in the UK, when you pay the license fee, you're paying the BBC to access
Yeah, it's
the
funny.
BBC.
I made the mistake of saying the BBC was free the other day, and there was a Brit in the audience. She's
and
like,
you
it's
said-
not free.
Yeah, exactly.
We pay for it.
Yeah,
I'm like, all right,
yeah.
fine. Welcome back to the Media Odyssey podcast. That is Marion Ranchet.
And this is Shapiro.
And today we're going to talk about, first of all, where are we?
We're in Lyon, in France.
Lyon, France?
Yeah.
Lyon, France.
Yeah.
We're in France.
We're in France.
How did we get here?
Ooh, good question. Actually, this is partly due to our amazing guests. So we're coming to see the team from Bedrock Streaming. You'll know everything about these guys. We're going to have Jonas Engwall coming to chat with us.
Cool. And so Bedrock Streaming does streaming infrastructure for a bunch of big players here in Europe. And I was asked recently, because I spend a lot of time in Europe, which I call my favorite continent now.
Yeah, it's mine too.
Yeah, well, it is a great continent. It's full of history. It's a lovely place, but also America is on fire. So I like coming here for many different reasons. We were just in London. Now we're in France. But I was asked recently to describe the difference between the television ecosystem in the United States and the television ecosystem in Europe, to describe the differences in consumption habits and platforms and things like that. And I started to get into it, and then I realized I have this great resource. The whole reason we started this podcast is so that I could tap into you. So you offered to teach me the history and kind of state of European streaming.
Yeah.
You ready to do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm schooling you every week, but I'm going to take it one step further this week again to talk about my favorite continent. Everyone knows that I'm French. We're not.
You're French?
Yes, I am.
Wow.
I know. I have a good accent, right?
Yeah, you can barely tell.
So it's not going to be an episode in French, but
good.
Yeah,
I don't
good, right? Because I've heard you make an order. It's quite pathetic. No, super exciting because I think that overall in the region, we're just too modest, too humble, right? And there's a lot of cool things happening. There's a lot of changes, but we have this tendency of, downplaying everything. And so what I want to do today is kind of take you through a couple of key trends that I see in the region. And then, I'm also keen to hear, but maybe we can start with that just quickly. What did you tell people when you had to say one thing about the European market? What was the one thing that came up fairly quickly?
It is the public broadcastings, the public broadcasters. The fact that they exist in Europe and they really do not in the U.S. We have PBS, we have NPR, but we don't really invest. In fact, per capita, the United States invests 1/10 in public media compared to Europe per capita. And that really influenced streaming because, as we were discussing, you don't see a locally grown independent streamer here. All the good streaming comes from public service broadcasting.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the interesting things. I think we would have loved to be the continent to give birth to, a Netflix, but we haven't. But again, the good thing is that we have a lot of local players who've been in the market for decades.
Right.
For decades. So TF1 in France, they turned 50 at the beginning of the year or last year, I can't remember. And so most of the streaming services today somehow in the background have a broadcaster, and I love that narrative because I'm hearing a lot of people saying linear TV is dead, broadcasting is doomed, etc. And I write a lot about that topic, and I want to focus today on what these guys are doing. So I'm going to give a couple of examples, and the thing that I want to do first is do a bit of geography. So
I'm terrible at geography.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. So this is not Lyon near Paris, Texas. This is France. So this is the French market. We have Italy, Spain, and Germany. With the UK, this is what we call EU5, right? So this is Western Europe. I want to focus on that because, again, this is a big continent. A lot is going on in that market, and you're seeing different trends in the Nordics, different trends in Eastern Europe. So I don't want to pretend that we're going to cover it all. We don't have time. But if I look at EU5 markets, and I'm going to...
Those are also the 5 largest television markets.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the biggest market in the region. And I'm going to leave the UK because we've covered it, at length, and it looks.
That's true. So we have covered
Yeah.
a lot about what's happening in the UK. We have a past episode with Channel 4. I've done a lot with you about our Barb report.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is why I wanted to kind of explore the other regions a little bit more.
And I think the UK looks, in many ways, there's changes there that, everyone says it happens in the UK after the US, and then it comes to continental Europe.
Right.
So we're in continental
Europe. Is that true?
Europe.
You feel like a trend hits in the US, then it comes to the UK, and then it spreads to the rest of the EU5
yes,
and the rest of Europe?
it will depend, right? And even within the EU5 market, you're seeing also, micro trends. But as a whole, what I would say is that, yes, we haven't been able to build a streaming native or streaming first champion. But what we're seeing in each of those markets are broadcasters who have seen linear viewership decreasing and thinking, all right, how are we making sure that we're still targeting and reaching those audiences that maybe are spending less time watching television, which is still a big amount. When we look at those markets versus the UK and the US, a market like France, for example, you're looking at over 3 hours per day, right? For people,
of TV.
Yeah, aged 4+. So we're still watching a lot of TV, but what TV means is changing, meaning that it's not just a live linear broadcast. All of those companies have built on-demand vehicles. They started small in the sense that it was very much not a copy and paste, but almost a copy and paste of what was happening on linear, right? So whatever you had on linear, you then had within an on-demand hub, and that's how BBC iPlayer launched. That's when M6 Replay and MyTF1, all of these guys
so these were basically broadcast duplicates.
Yeah, exactly. Except that you had that digital component,
and
you
an
could
on-demand
choose.
environment.
You could choose. Right. All of this is free, depending on which service you're being served ads, right? So we make a distinction between the public broadcasters, who are mostly funded either via taxes or a license fee. Some can actually put some ads, but someone like the BBC cannot. They're only funded by the license fee that UK consumers are paying every year. And then you have the commercial guys, and these guys are essentially ad sales powerhouses. And this is an important point that we'll touch upon later because they have a massive edge. They've been in that business for, again, the last 50 years. And so what we've seen changing is that these guys are now really building hubs that are almost standalone hubs. Some, in the sense that whether that's TF1, M6+, you can decide not to watch any live TV. If you want, you can. But if you just want to consume on-demand content, you can. The libraries are not just about what was on broadcast. Someone like TF1 has, I think, something like 30K on-demand assets. M6, 15K.
They're licensing content and housing content
and they're
that isn't
really,
necessarily on their broadcast.
Exactly. They're really building, massive hubs. It's almost like a Netflix-like approach. The only difference that it's
homegrown.
Free.
It's free.
It's free.
So, but even the commercial players are traditionally offering their streaming service for free, or is there a paid service?
So it's interesting. They do both, but historically they're very much free-to-play players, right?
Because that's how they are over the air. They're broadcast.
Yeah, exactly.
They're commercial
you're not
only.
Paying,
There's not an affiliate fee.
You're not paying to watch to watch the broadcast.
Yeah, just to take a beat on that for a second. That's another major difference.
Yeah.
So broadcasters used to be free in the United States.
Yeah.
I remember when broadcasters were free, but now, for the most part, while you can access them with an antenna if you really want to, very few people do, and most people actually are paying to get the broadcasters into their home over cable, over pay TV. Pay TV and satellite and cable, what we call in the US, really doesn't command that much of the marketplace here in Europe.
Anymore. Well, so
anymore, or
what's interesting? No, I thought you were mentioning the US, but
well, no, it's declining.
There's
obviously,
multiple ways to access free television, right? So that's terrestrial, that's the antenna. It's true that you can use the set-top box of your operator, where it's this one big bundle where you have mobile, internet, and TV. So in a way, it may feel like you're paying, right? But I would still think that most people think that this is, baked in, and they're not really paying. In a way, right? In the UK, when you pay the license fee, you're paying the BBC to access
Yeah, it's
the
funny. I
BBC.
made the mistake of saying the BBC was free the other day, and there was a Brit in the audience who's
and
like,
you
"It's
said-
not free.
Yeah, exactly.
We pay for it."
Yeah,
I'm like, all right,
yeah, yeah.
fine.
But you know what I mean? There's not that paywall getting in the way.
But the point you were making, crucially here, is that the broadcasters, so the M6s, the
so you have TF1, RTL.
they are, for the most part, making their streaming offerings free the way that their broadcasting was intended to be.
Most of them have a premium component where you can go ad-free, but honestly, I've never seen any numbers except for the UK with ITVX, which is around, it's around 1 million when they have over 14 million monthly active users. So you
Less
see
than 10%.
the DNA is not in fully premium. For most, we have one exception. Well, there's a few exceptions, but one major exception, and we'll talk to it later on because Bedrock is part of the same group. It's RTL Plus in Germany. So it's a commercial broadcaster. They had TV channels. They started
Free.
Yeah, again free. Ads being served. They started with an on-demand play, and then these last few years they've built this massive vehicle, and they have something around 7 to 8 million subscribers on the German market, and it's a mix of free and pay, and they've been very successful at that.
There's a totally free version, which has the full ad load and maybe not all the content?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then
they
the pay has
tiers.
more content.
We'll ask Jonas exactly because I can't remember,
Yeah.
but but again, it's not a pure player like we've seen, with a Netflix like you guys in the US. And I think that shows our ability to innovate and to follow the trends, right? Where users are moving away from linear into digital and streaming. And again, we're not saying enough about those players and what they're bringing to the table. And we'll speak a bit later about the platform excellence that they thrive to bring to
I think
local
that's kind
consumers.
of that is so there's two things. You're right. I think Europeans tend to be a little bit, even the French, polite or apologetic about what they do in our business.
Yeah.
Meaning, well, we're just Europeans. We're not, the American or the global players.
Yeah, and at the same time, we're pissed off when you guys are just showing muscles. So I think we got to change the narrative a bit.
But I think, well, there's two things to note here. When you look at every territory in Europe and you look at only streaming, not broadcast, right? The top 3 to 4 slots are global American streaming entities. Typically in order: YouTube, Netflix, Prime, Disney.
Yeah.
And this is true. Like when you look at England, even BBC was the reason why I think they're so successful as a streamer is they got into it very early.
Yeah,
there was Netflix, and then really in quick succession there was SVT in Sweden and BBC, and they fast followed and they got out ahead of it. So I think that's why they are so good at streaming. And you're right. I think the rest of Europe followed in behind that or flowed in behind that. On the flip side, when you look at streaming habits, and especially true when you look at streamers under the age of 30 or 35, it's dominated by the American players. And you've never seen a European streamer really. Viaplay tried it.
Yeah, and even these guys are coming from Viasat, again, broadcaster.
In the U.S., no one's really been able to reverse the trend there. I think one of the key elements is it's very difficult to hyper-serve. We were talking about this earlier. Reed Hastings said, we're not local, we're global. If you want local content, go to your local programmers. We're a complement to that. Yeah. The flip side of that is none of these folks are truly global or interregional streamers. There's a couple of different reasons. One, rights and content and language. But beyond that is the infrastructure. It's very hard to Netflix, because they have to stream for 100 million, 200 million players, because they have to think about a global reach and a global footprint, they have to, or they were forced to build an infrastructure that could handle that much streaming, that much bandwidth, that much technology flowing all over the planet Earth. Whereas if you're BBC, it's a free player for England.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's a different use case.
But
it's
also
building a
timing,
multinational.
It's a question of timing. Like, I think it's hard to compare people who've been in the TV business for 50 years and folks who launched 20 years ago. I'm sorry, but the world has, all of those
How
companies.
so? Wait, so
Well,
what you're saying there is there's a difference between, let's say, ZDF or RTL
before
and
internet
Netflix.
and after internet. No,
Right.
but I mean the rules of the games are different, right? When all of these guys, the broadcasters came in, they did with the technology that was available at the time, and the technology was very much localized. It's not like you were pressing a button like Netflix did 15 years ago and said, boom, we're live globally, right? So they've been, local champions, and it's local champions, trying to ride that wave and adapt. So not trying to say that Netflix had it easy, but I think it's very hard to compare the two. You're talking about a company that is still fairly young.
Netflix.
Yeah. Even if it's 20 years old, but the same for YouTube.
But they're so dominant, I think it's very easy for us to think that they always existed, but in reality...
But they did not, and so...
Less than 20 years ago, they were delivering DVDs through the mail.
No, that's true. It's a great example of a company who's transitioned, perfectly. But what I'm saying is that they haven't been around the block for so long, and so they don't have that thing about having an historical or legacy. Legacy maybe is not the right term because it looks like a dead weight, right? But it's an asset for all of these guys. But at the same time, what's tricky is that they're trying to navigate the two things. They're trying to keep the linear vehicle, which, I'm sorry, is still the biggest portion of both viewership and money coming their way. You look at ITV, they released their results a few weeks back, and digital ad revenues, it's only 26%. We're talking...
Right, but
still talking about...
Hit pause there for a second. It's 26%. That's actually pretty,
that's pretty good for
pretty
something
sizable.
Yeah, for something that launched 2 years ago, right? Yeah, 100%. But so they are dabbling in those waters. So I'm not saying that it's easy to be Netflix, but yeah.
It is easier, though. I mean, there is this thing, which is, first of all, Netflix doesn't have a linear product.
Yeah.
Every broadcaster streaming app has a linear product and an on-demand product. Every single one. Yeah. And so that is...
I think that's an asset.
It's not only I think it is an asset. I think you're right.
Unlike what Reed is saying when it's saying that, well, he was speaking about the U.S. Companies, but during it was Ted, it wasn't Reed, but he said, unlike others, we don't have
a linear
dead
network.
weight linear assets.
Distraction.
Right?
He said distraction. He didn't say dead weight.
Yeah, I think that's
But then
how
Bob Iger basically told him, fuck you, a couple weeks later. He's like, this is spinning off $1 billion a year in cash for us. Shut the fuck up. Yeah. Which I thought was a neat clapback. But I do think that it is harder to do what the streamers in Europe are doing. They're forced to do the more difficult thing of combining linear and on-demand.
I'm happy you're agreeing.
I totally agree. And I also think that, well, let me ask you a question. I think that the history of free television here is an advantage this ecosystem has that the U.S., you know, the fact that we pay for everything in the U.S.
And pay a lot, right?
Which is now beginning to catch up to us in the churnpocalypse, right? No one ever churns from the BBC iPlayer. No one ever churns from probably, you know, RTL Plus free. Nobody ever churns from ITVX free because why would you cancel?
Well, true, but so it's not churn because it's not a subscription, but there's still that loyalty element even if it's free. Huh?
That's true. So you can churn, you can not go back, I guess. So that is a big advantage, but I also think it makes it much more difficult to be a streamer in Europe. Because you're so focused on this duality of linear and on-demand of the ecosystem that you're already trying to protect. So I think it's a higher bar. And my question to you is, you know, you look at the history of free here, and you would think that there would be less intention to pay, right? Yeah. Which explains the popularity of YouTube on streaming for Europeans. But it doesn't explain Prime, Disney, and Netflix. You know, why do you think all of a sudden the Europeans have started to lean into the idea of paying for content when so long they didn't?
So that's a very good question.
Thanks.
I think there's a few things, and there I have to say I have to give credit to Netflix. I think they've really created a market for themselves and then for others. 100%. And I think it was a lot around it wasn't so much about, oh, there's no ads, because we do have ads, but nothing compared to you guys where you're getting an ad every 10 minutes. The ad load is much lower here.
That's true.
So I think it was more, convenience, being to watch content, on the go, whenever you want, etc. So I think that's
on
really,
any device that.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think it's also? I make a big deal about the generational shift in this territory on my favorite continent, Europe, which is you're the upside down from the rest of the world. You're
age-wise.
Age-wise, you're almost 60% over 40, whereas the U.S. is 52 or 3% over. Under 40, the world is almost 2/3 under 40. Do you feel like millennials becoming the heads of household? Like I love to say, millennials aren't kids; they have kids.
Yeah.
Do you feel that generational shift, as slow as it's been to come here, is now really taking hold? And when you look at the streaming audience, it tends to be younger than the older audience.
Yeah. So we were talking about linear TV, and just for a second, I think one of the reasons why, on top of the quality of content, having local relevant content, the fact that it's free, a big portion of why linear is resisting so well, and what we're seeing in any numbers in any of those EU5 markets is, of course, TV is very much what I would say senior, but over 40. Oh man, I'm 45 this year.
Actually, over 55 when you look at
55 and older. So the question is, will these new generation take with them their habits, and then there's no room for TV? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
and
I mean, if you look at in every territory, so it's not just the UK where I've done most of my research, but I've looked at each one of these territories, and the broadcaster's streaming platform comes in 4th place. Or 3rd place. On a good day,
there's
it
a
comes in
relevance
3rd place.
challenge.
But when you look at consumers under the age of 40 in these territories, the broadcaster streamer comes in 4th, 5th, 6th place. Behind, you're talking about Netflix, YouTube, Amazon, Disney, and now even with Max coming over here and Paramount really spreading their wings over here, suddenly they're going to be competing more and more for time and attention. I think it's really I think it's unlikely that somebody who's 20 years old and is streaming a healthy diet every day of YouTube and Netflix is going to suddenly wake up someday and you say, you know what, I'm going to download the broadcaster app. But maybe I'm wrong.
I think maybe it's a long shot for them to turn on their TV and watch linear broadcast. But I think the whole point of those streaming hubs from broadcasters is to make sure that actually they're always in that
getting
mix.
Out ahead. And sports rights is a big part, I think, in Europe of keeping that audience around. If you can keep the major football leagues and other sports and the Olympics.
And there's a question of local stories as well.
Right.
When you wanna watch, true local stories. And sorry, Emily in Paris does not cut it. That's not French content.
That's not French.
That's not French. No.
But also,
even Emily, I wouldn't. It should be written with a Y. But no. But honestly. If you look at big cultural moment, whether that's through the news, through sports events, and through drama, comedy, etc., I think these guys have a big role to play. And what's interesting is that what we've been seeing these last few months is there's a lot of collaboration between the streamers and the broadcasters. The big streamers were like, we're doing everything on our own. There's many more co-pros. There's many more windowing where, so TF1 and M6 will be doing a daily soap. It's going to be on Netflix. 5 days later, it's on TF1. So there's going to be more of that coming. And one of the reasons is because those local players have those local stories. So I think there's still a way to grab these guys. Having said that, the diet cannot be TV only. The diet will be a mix of YouTube, Netflix, a couple of broadcasters, and there you go. And the question is going to be, how do you make sure you're, amongst those, 4 or 5 apps people are using?
It seems very unlikely people are going to use more than 4 or 5 apps. I mean, that's been the history. When we had 1,000 channels, we only used 4 or 5 channels.
Of course.
Now, all the research demonstrates
ease of use.
And that gets us to our next topic, which is there was this piece of research I shared on the last episode, which is more than half of consumers now say that the user experience determines whether or not they use a streaming app.
Yeah.
And so if these local powerhouses, if these local broadcasters are going to be able to capture that younger audience and compete with the global streamers, their tech is going to have to be pristine. It's going to have to not buffer. The search has to be good. And it's very difficult to build a bespoke streamer for your tiny little country. No offense to anybody in this territory,
no, but it is
even
still
Germany is
small,
relatively tiny compared to California. That makes it complicated to accomplish this streaming task. It makes our guest, who's on, our special guest, the reason why we're in Lyon, his job that much more important and complicated. Should we bring him in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Welcome,
Jonas. Come on in. Good to see you.
He's so rude. See this guy, American guy. Let's teach him today. Let's teach him.
Okay, I'm not French.
He's not either, actually.
That's true.
Swedish. Welcome here to France.
You're an invader. Thanks for bringing us here, giving us a reason to come to Lyon, enjoy the food and the wine with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
What is Bedrock streaming? Why was it born? Where did it come from? Why does it have a place in the world?
You know, before I go there, if you don't mind, I was listening a little bit to your conversation, and I thought, kind of, it's more of an anecdotal story, but I think, and you were also saying that Europeans are kind of a bit apologetic, and etc., which I think is true, by the way. I think it's funny because if you think back, I'm not sure if you remember this the way I remember it, 15 years ago when we spoke about streaming in Europe, everyone talked about rules around streaming, like what content can go on streaming. And that was kind of based on what was on Netflix, right? So like it was movies and like serialized kind of series that had very strong kind of connectivity throughout the episodes. And it's very funny.
Yeah, there was no reality show.
Yeah, reality was a no-no. Sports was no-no. Like a lot of stuff were no-nos, right? Basically. And it's funny now. And at the time it was like, yeah, but you know, for streaming we have to have different content and all of these completely banana ideas, basically. And now, as it turns out, I would say Netflix is actually coming more our way than the other way around, right? So, I mean, both on the content side and on advertising. So, like, all the things
sports, live, ads, they're becoming basically a broadcast.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of, the way I look at things is streaming is tech, you know, and content is content. And it just happens that streaming is a way better way to kind of discover and experience content. So coming back to...
At the end of the day, people still want the same things.
Exactly. Ultimately, you're transporting content in front of eyeballs, right? But in a better way. So coming back to your question, what is Bedrock and why do we exist, basically? So Bedrock, in its current form, its name and its structure, was born in 2019. Back then, RTL, part of Bertelsmann and also M6, etc., had, depending how you count, 4 or 5 different streaming platforms. And they were built around the premise of European broadcasters, where everything was done separately, right? Like the French guys would build their French channels and their French platform, the Germans would be theirs, and everybody else would do their own, right? That's how I think people look at broadcasting in Europe. Part of that is right, because you have language barriers and different, but when it comes to tech, it just doesn't apply. And we are born out of 2 simple principles. Back in 2019, I was always arguing that you can, whatever country, pick any country you will, but don't worry about your old enemies, so to speak. Your end users that are using your streaming platform are not bothered about those guys. They're bothered about, are you at the same level as a Netflix, as a Spotify?
So you're saying for a French broadcaster / streamer, stop worrying about competing intramurally in France. Think about competing with Disney
especially
and Netflix.
When it comes to an experience around streaming, right? So back then, again, no offense, and you know the times are different, but back then, I would say generally platforms were glitchy. On a weekly basis, they would go down. They were totally different from a Netflix. Like Netflix, I mean, yes, they've had issues, but I mean, generally it's pretty stable and robust. And so basically, we were saying that the end users expect you in France and Germany and all the other countries to be as good as Prime.
Do you think that that was because they were content first, tech second? that was the approach to the platform, is we're going to be so picky about the content environment, we're not spending as much. I mean, to your point, Netflix is a tech company that added content to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazon is a tech company that added content to it.
Yeah.
Disney is not a tech company, but they bought a tech company before they launched.
I think it was part of the DNA. It was just like they were so used to looking left and right within the country to their competitors. So it was just unnatural to kind of compare yourself from a platform perspective outside of the country, so to speak. That was just natural behavior. Nothing wrong with that, but I think it doesn't really translate that well in the streaming and tech environment. So we were very clear. We said, look, the bar is not set by the French players. The bar is set by the global players.
Or any players for that matter.
So that you have to play. That's where you have to be if you want your content to be delivered and shine in a global context. So that was number one. And then we said, to get there, I was 100% convinced you can't get there until you can't reach the scale needed in any European country, in any one European country. And frankly, at the time, which I think I'm getting proven wrong, but at the time I said, outside of China and the US and India, I was basically making the argument that those countries have enough scale in one country. And I think, I mean, in the US, it was more that's not the case anymore. So I was saying, there's no way for European players to do this separately in every country. You have to reach scale one way or the other.
So at the time, you're working where? You're working for RTL?
This is back in 2019. I was working at RTL Group at the time for a couple of months.
Just to back up for those who are uninitiated. So RTL Group is a German broadcasting and media company that has lots of things that they own.
Across Europe.
And then Bertelsmann sits, that is the parent of
exactly.
RTL.
Bertelsmann, you add Penguin Random House and a lot of other assets on top of that.
But then to go into TV, they also own M6, which is a French broadcaster.
Yeah, correct.
So you had German and French broadcasting systems internally inside this one company. So you're working at RTL, and you're saying, don't try to build these things in silos in different countries. Unify resources to create scale to compete on a global way.
And by the way, I was brought in, the concept of doing this in a smarter way had already, reached the group, RTL Group management, right? So that's why I came into the picture. So, and we were just, at the time, they were like spending double-digit millions on all of these platforms. So in total...
At different divisions.
Exactly. So in total for RTL Group...
Sounds like Paramount.
Yeah, exactly. they were not spending low amounts of money, right? But they were just spending it in a very inefficient way, redoing... So I, at the time, we were saying, like, you're spending, like, 60+ million, but actually any one consumer only sees 15. So that's a really bad way to spend money, right? So we said, look, we're doing this the wrong way. We should really pool our resources and build something that is really, really strong and make that money work in a better way. So that's the birth of what Bedrock is today.
So
hence the name, right?
Hence the name, yeah, exactly.
So that became the Bedrock. That became the Bedrock streaming platform.
Yep.
For all the RTL Group enterprises.
Yes. I mean, now what you're saying is true. It's just that that's a 5-year.
Yeah.
That's a
right. It took 5
journey,
years
right?
to get there.
Yeah.
Right. So you were laboring away at that at RTL to get to that point, but then you realized that you're mastering it, right? So RTL Plus being one of the products, and you're going to be building out features for business with all of your current clients.
Yep.
But then you decided, or the company decided, to spin Bedrock out and become its own white label product for other players around the world.
Absolutely.
So you had gotten so good at creating scale amongst all these different divisions that you are now ready to offer this product to everybody else.
Absolutely.
How's that going?
So I would say quite good. I mean, we have a lot of interest. And so we do things in I would argue, very strategic and paced way, so to speak. I'll give you an example. In 2019, when I said to Thomas Rabe is he has a lot of roles, including the CEO of Bertelsmann and also CEO of RTL Group. I told him, look, if we're doing this right. We're going to build a platform that really truly can compete with global giants and can be on par with those, and that's going to cost this much money. And we said, if you want to do this right, this is how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And we're going to end up Bedrock. We're going to be basically losing money because we didn't have enough partners around the table
to recoup
that money that it really took. But that to me was the right way to go at it, right? And this is the benefit of having really long-term stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
So the group, they take this very seriously. They're pivoting their legacy business, which is a 6 billion kind of business, into streaming. So obviously you want to get it right. So this made total sense. So I think that this is, so what I want to say was this, is we do things, and we do things at a certain pace, at a certain way, that we are making sure that we are creating value for the stakeholders around the table. So yes, we will have external people coming in, but not at the detriment of the existing partners, right? So we're very cautious. I talk about a responsible growth. You know, we could earn way more money than we're doing today, but we want to do this in a responsible way. We want that the people come into this kind of community or streaming kind of ecosystem that we have in a way that it creates value for them, it creates value for us, and it creates value for the existing partners, you know, because that's really important for us, that we have because we are a super close-knitted group. We're really collaborating around streaming. We operate in a very different way.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. You guys are weird. I mean, you're pretty strange.
Yeah, I agree.
You turn money down, you turn clients down, right? Because, and as you just explained, so you have these corporate owners who you were born out of, who you feel a responsibility for, but mostly as a platform.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, you want to keep fiscal responsibility there, but ultimately their product can't fail.
No, exactly.
And so what you don't do is running around the planet building bespoke products for a whole bunch of different people.
Exactly.
People have to buy into the Bedrock platform, the Bedrock concept, the Bedrock ecosystem.
And it's a bit like a democracy, because we
Europe.
Yeah, exactly. No, but
Socialism.
Yeah, again, every time he says that.
Well, it's true. I mean, I covet it.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. But like, to the point you were making, you can't have anyone joining, because we're talking about tier one players from each of those markets. And so when you're looking,
a good fit.
Yeah, the platform and the products, everyone has a say, is my understanding. You know, what matters to each of those, and you're then looking to build what works for all, meaning that you wouldn't necessarily do one feature if it benefits only one partner. Is that
We would still, I mean, so it's going to risk to get very complicated, but basically, simply put, basically the product is 90% what we call core. So under the hood, it's kind of, think of a Netflix, virtual Netflix, right? Like the teams are different in every market. It looks totally different. The platform is very configurable.
But everybody taps into a core
product. The core is, there's multiple examples of this, right? In the car industry, you build, like, you have a core, chassis, and then the different end products look different and different price points. But so we have a 90% what we call core, which is highly configurable. So what I mean with that is we have players that are SVOD players that, let's say, focus on video. We have players that are AVOD and now hybrid. They have live, fast, normal VOD content, podcast, audiobooks, you know. So we have a breadth of content, we have a breadth of ways to monetize, and then also the look and feel. So a general misconception is, oh, so we have to, like, look, we're going to lose our look, we're going to, not at all, right? So, like, the French end consumers, they don't know that they're on the same platform as the Germans, right? Because it looks totally different, it speaks to you in a different way, it monetizes differently, it has different content, everything is different. But the core of that, so said differently, when we evolve the platform, so generally, we don't have difficulties to align people. The timing is a little bit, shifted.
They're more or less advanced, because M6 Plus just relaunched less than a year ago.
Yeah, exactly.
This brand new streaming vehicle.
Yeah.
RTL Plus, Videoland, they've been at this for many more years.
So that you have a little bit of shift in timing, but that generally we do a pretty good job, I would say, collaborating around this. And what we do, and this is not rocket science. This is we build the feature one time, and then it's available
to everybody, whether they choose to use it or not.
Then they can say, "I don't want it."
Yeah, I think the car analogy is a good analogy, which is imagine if you could tap into an engine that was road tested 1,000 miles at 1,000 miles an hour forever. That you're able, or to your point, tap into a Netflix scaled product for your business, which you can change the front end
feel
on.
Like what you want it to be. And I talk about this, I use the analogy of a Lego, you know when you buy Lego for kids, you can buy a Lego and it turns into a Star Wars thing, or it turns into a fire truck or whatever.
Make your own
so like it's ultimately Lego, but it's created differently, right? So that's what we do, right? For every client, we create a Lego for that client. And that's work we do up front. And we will create templates and fonts, and we will convert their way of engaging with the user into the visual, persona, so to speak. And then once that is done, they can play around and do stuff with that without us, and change it on a per day, whatever they can create. I don't know. There's a football match in the evening.
They have their flexibility to do with the product what they want to do on a daily basis. But at the end of the day, the product itself is road tested, and it's run in a collaborative way. The way that you talked about it is very interesting. As a democracy, I see it as a bit of a collaborative community.
Yeah, I agree.
Everybody sits around and says, "These are the features we want. Let's talk about what's good for the whole."
Yeah.
And I think that kind of radical collaboration, which I've been talking about for a while, is so rare.
Yeah.
It is essential
days,
here,
but
again,
there's no way
to gain scale.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that like the German or the Dutch are actually learning from M6, because they started a year ago, and I'm sure from day one they came into this business with things that maybe were not possible 5 years ago, etc. Can I ask you something on the platform excellence? So are we on par, with the global guys? Are we there yet? And sub-question, what do we have maybe that they don't, or what do we need to work on? What are you seeing?
So I think in terms of being on par, it's really difficult to answer that question. I would say it's a moving target, right? So I would say in certain areas, yes. And I think in certain areas, we're still not there yet, which I think is okay. I mean, this is a journey we're on. And what, differences, I mean, and to a certain degree, what you were talking about before, and I made this point to our stakeholders multiple times, right? As in, back in the day, we had a tougher job than Netflix, because Netflix had one product. It was VOD, SVOD.
Yeah.
And we have SVOD, AVOD, hybrid, linear channels.
That's what I was just talking about. Like, you have a much more difficult lift with these streamers.
They're catching up in the sense that they're also
they're adding all these other things.
They're adding sports, they're adding
But they don't have a linear product, and they probably never will.
Yeah, maybe not. And I actually think that and this is RTL Plus has been championing this, right? The having multiple content categories in one place. So podcasts, audiobooks, and stuff like that.
They are a lifestyle bundle, and you like to talk about lifestyle.
No,
they have magazines.
To me, that's where it's going.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you can argue what the categories are, and they will differ between countries and stakeholders. And now, of course, with Bertelsmann, they have lots of audio. They have lots of books and audiobooks, so that makes total sense. Which might not make sense in a different market, but I think that the concept of combining content is now slowly becoming a trend, right? Because you see, I mean, I would argue you see Netflix. They have gaming, you have Prime, they have podcasts.
They're talking about doing podcasts.
Yeah, exactly. So like and you have Globe in Brazil, you have players in Middle East, and then I think the concept is good because it reduces churn. And to your point, there's only so many apps one single user is going to have, right? So if you can discover extra value within that little ecosystem, You say, oh, great, I can actually get my podcast here. I don't need to kind of go
And
off
consumers keep saying, I want one bill, I want one location. I don't want to have to keep logging in and out of all these things. That said, they're going to chase the content wherever it goes too.
Yeah.
So I will say, when I was building, so I built a streaming service called CISO, RIP. And when I bought the streaming backbone, which is pre-Bedrock, the idea that I would be able to go sit around a table with this vendor's other clients and compare notes, that would have scared the fuck out of them, right? There would have been no way they would have no, you can ask them for a reference, but don't compare notes, because they were charging different people. You said this earlier. Charging different people different things and making money off of A so they could do it cheaper for B. That's not how you operate your business. You operate this weird collective where everybody sits around the table and says, these are the features we want, we operate together. It is so refreshing to hear that approach. I wish that I had access to some kind of collective where I could compare best practices and compare feature sets. And then here, that 10% that you're fucking around with all the time with your designers in Guatemala or wherever it is, that's really not doing any, in fact, it's complicating your product. It's increasing churn. It's increasing fall off. Concentrate on the core engine.
And you get, to your point, right, you get exponential innovation happening, because in a traditional model, you have to innovate. You have to innovate, you have to
by yourself, in an isolation.
And you're alone, right? Whereas here, and this, we have practical examples. So we discussed something, it came up, okay, should we have vertical short form content? And MC says, yeah, I really like that. I'll bet that that's going to work, right? And the others go, yeah, I think that makes sense. But MCs, you go first. In this case, right? So in some cases, they all jump on it. And in this particular case, MCs was first. And this is not about, hard feelings or anybody pushing the other one in front. It's just genuinely they were super excited and the others were a little bit less excited. And okay, this is great, because then MCs goes off and tests.
And get the data back, and then everybody gets to see how it works.
Exactly.
That's the benefit of the collective.
And in this particular case, it turned out to be awesome, because the conversion rate is sky high between the short form to the long form. So MC said, okay, we're doing this with most of all content, and the other guy said, okay, I want this.
I want to do that.
And in a normal circumstance, they would have seen M6 launch it, gone, well, that's not going to work.
Or a competitor.
Right. And then it works, and they're like, well, how do we scramble to do this? Now it's just
click. It's a little more complicated than that, but
it's ostensibly now a feature on the car that I can choose to add without breaking everything.
Exactly. So
it is really refreshing.
Can I ask you something? Because at the top, we were talking about how there is no European streaming service. A pure player, like a Netflix, a version of Netflix in the region. And that's also because we're a piecemeal of a continent. So
not a country. I learned that today.
Yeah, you learned that today. There's an atlas, so you can take it home. I kid you not, there's an atlas with Europe 1.
I just speak English wherever I go, though. That works for me.
Yeah, we're getting better at
getting better in English.
We're getting better. No, my question is, if we don't have a front end or a D2C brand being the pan-European vehicle, can we expect maybe some sort of collaboration in more markets, consolidation, and then the pan-European platform is not the D2C, it's the tech underneath?
Yeah, I mean,
that's ostensibly what you built.
That's what you're trying to do, right?
Exactly, that's where we're going, right? So
it is pan-European, it is pan-global, it is pan-territory.
Yeah, and
it's
we will
still
be outside.
a few number of countries in the region, though, right? So
today.
Today. No, absolutely.
No. I mean, we're decent numbers, right? So just to give you some numbers, in a few months we will cross over 500 people, and they're mainly tech guys, product, of course. We operate today. This is before Germany. We have 50 million users on the platform. We offer the content is, like I mentioned before, all kinds of content, including audiobooks and podcasts. We have 60 devices. We cover pretty much most devices you can think of. So I mean, for every additional thing we add to the platform, it makes it so much easier to move into the next territory. And I think you're right. I don't know if there's going to be. I wouldn't bet my money that it's going to be a B2C, the European, whatever brand that is. But I do think that Bedrock will power a lot of players in and outside of Europe. So yes, you will
allowing them to use the power of the platform you've built
exactly
to compete with global players.
And just to give you one more number, like we spend between 60 and 80 million every year on tech.
Yeah.
And we can then basically distribute that cost across multiple players. It would be very difficult, or at least minimum economically difficult to justify to spend 80 million in one country.
Especially right now.
Exactly.
Right? Everyone is looking to
cut
back, be profitable.
Yeah.
And so something's got to give.
So like if you look at I was saying in the beginning, RTL Group were spending like 60, 70, whatever million in total, but the output from an end user perspective was like 15.
Because they only touched a certain product.
Exactly, and now it's the other way around. You know, like where the output for the user is really high, and so it's a smarter way.
That is another element of you know, again, as a recovering buyer of these products, right? The inefficiency of every buyer building their own product. It just seems bonkers from this side of it, but until you said a lot of the stuff that we talked about earlier, like it's hard to conceive of me tapping into a product that we all use is going to benefit all of us, but it does.
Exactly, it does, and yeah, it makes total sense, and again, it acts and engages with your user totally different from one country to the other. So it's not, you know, that we're trying to cram everything into something that nobody wants, right? It's generally hyper flexible within those 90%.
But it's the operational scale that truly matters.
Exactly. And it also gives peace of mind, right? Because we operate at scale, we have money to invest into stability, scalability. Again, that is, it's one thing to build a platform for a couple 100,000 people, and for a couple of million and 50 million, that's a totally different challenge. So I think people underestimate, and it's not just the bonkers way of rebuilding stuff. You also find the people. Like you're like you have to then
the expert.
Exactly. There's only so many experts out there, right? In Europe, at least. So if you get
only so much bandwidth, and that's the thing. It's like I'm waiting. It's in the funnel. It's on the roadmap. It's in the funnel. It's on the roadmap. You have one combined roadmap, one combined funnel. Well, this was great, and I think you're right. I think you know, if we're going to come up with a pan-European, it is the back engine that's going to wind up being pan-European. I think Bedrock is positioned well to be that. So thank you for giving us a reason to come to Lyon.
Thank you.
Please come back.
What did you think? Was it good? I mean, we should say, like, in person again, second time only.
So nice. I feel like I'm on a chat show.
Your living room is super nice.
So maybe I will actually do this from my couch at home next time. We should think about that.
I'll do it from my couch.
Let's do that.
Well, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for giving me my European lesson. This was great being in person. It was great being in Lyon. Where can we see your newsletter?
Streaming Made Easy is on Substack. How about yours?
It is Media War and Peace, also on Substack. Thank you all for being here this week. It was great to be with you in Lyon. We'll see you soon.
See you next time.